The Detroit Lions are set to get Mufasa'd in 2025 and get thrown off the NFC cliff. I'll break it down on today's edition of Locked On NFL.
The new Locked On NFL. The madman Tyler Rowland is your double shot of NFL espresso with the Locked On local experts on every major story. Get ready, Rowland is revving up. The new Locked On NFL starts now. Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Football fans, welcome into the Locked On NFL podcast, bringing you a double dose of the NFL's biggest stories with help from our local experts that know your favorite teams like no one else. I am your host, the madman, Tyler Rowland, joined today by Locked On NFL expert, the mastermind, Ross Jackson. On today's episode, we're going to answer what is the biggest question for the Indianapolis Colts with their quarterback situation. What about the Denver Broncos, who are looking to take a step forward? And we'll start with the Detroit Lions, who I think will get Mufasa'd this season. Before we dive into it, do want to thank you for making Locked On NFL your first listen and for being an everydayer here with us at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. So, Ross, this is a drum that I'm going to be beating throughout the offseason. I feel very strongly about this situation, and there's not much that can happen from here on out to change my mind. I think that the Detroit Lions are going to take a step back in the NFC. Now, they very well may make the playoffs still. They very well may be a wild card team, but I think after their, 15-2 season last year, being the best team in the NFC a couple of years in a row, I think the Lions take a step back. I don't think they win their division, and I don't think that they're a serious threat in the NFC, and most people would say, well, Tyler, that's pretty crazy. Why would you think that? And at the end of the day, I know that this is what it is, but I don't trust Dan Campbell to rebound from losing both of his coordinators. I'm not saying that he cannot do it ever, but I don't trust that they have gotten the right people immediately. That's too unlikely for me. So I think with the step back of losing to head coach level coordinator, both the coordinators went to be head coaches. We are acknowledging that they are some of the highest level coordinators you could have in the league last year. Losing that sort of talent in the coaching staff, Dan Campbell not being a play caller or a play designer, I'm sorry, I think that hurts the Lions. That was one of their big advantages. He's still a good coach, but I don't think he's good enough to overcome that this year.
Yeah, that's going to be the biggest question mark around all this is, can he hire the right guys or find the right guys to maximize the talent that they have on the roster? Because it's undeniable that they have the talent on the roster, right? Like those boxes are checked. I think they have two of the most talented but not often talked about players on their offense, and Sewell on the offensive line, as well as Jahmyr Gibbs at running back, everything. And so I think that they have the talent, but are they going to be able to maximize the talent? It's interesting how quickly everything went from everything the light touches to where the Detroit Lions are right now, which might be no kingdom at all. We'll see where it all goes. Don't worry, I got a couple of Lion King references ready. I'm cooking. I'm ready to go.
I love that too. But yeah, I mean, that's obviously the biggest question. If we're doing the biggest question, I think it's completely fair to say the biggest question for the Lions is, how will these coordinators respond? And look, I'm not the only person out in the media talking about how I think the Lions might take a step back, but I can tell you someone who doesn't agree. And it's my guy, Matt Derry from Locked On Lions, and he seems very annoyed at the Dan Campbell lack of faith.
It's always, Dan's a leader of men. Dan is an unbelievable guy in that locker room. The culture in Detroit. The players love him. He's a player's coach. We saw him on Hard Knocks a couple years ago. The guys just rally around him. But what people don't talk about is the strategic advantage that sometimes the Lions have with Dan Campbell on the sidelines, because he just doesn't look the part. There's all of these nerdy, and I'm going to say it, there's a lot of nerdy coaches in the league. The analytical guys, the guys that have been, trained by the numbers, and they're maybe not as big and strong, and former tight end like Dan Campbell is. All right. And a lot of these guys are now in that McVay, LaFleur, McDaniel type of mode. And here's Dan Campbell as a former player, and everybody thinks that the offense is going to take a step back because Ben Johnson's gone. And yes, Ben Johnson was named coordinator of the year last year. He's been the best offensive coordinator in the sport for 2 to 3 years. He's phenomenal. It was a phenomenal assistant coach. But I think Schlereth has a point. A lot of the offense as well ran through Dan Campbell. Dan Campbell was good with some of the design stuff that Ben Johnson came up with. Dan Campbell was the one who said, let's go for it and be aggressive on fourth down. Dan Campbell and Ben Johnson worked together in Miami years ago, and Ben worked under Dan and learned a lot from what Dan Campbell knows and thinks.
Listen, I don't think that Matt is wrong there. Let me say this, though. Ross, we don't get political on this show. This is the most political I'm going to get. Ross just had a bead of sweat go down his head there. What do you mean?
No, it's all good. I trust you.
Growing up, the phrase I heard in politics was the lesser of two evils.
Sure.
And I think you can look at that at a lot of things in life because very few options are pure and perfect and there's no downside to them. Often it's give and take. Yep. Well, I think when we talk about NFL coaches, the CEO head coach gives you a lot. And I think there are a lot of, quote unquote, to use Matt's words, nerdy coaches out there, like a Mike McDaniel, maybe like a Kellen Moore in New Orleans, who maybe don't have the leadership qualities that make Dan Campbell and Nick Sirianni and Mike Tomlin and Mike Vrabel great. And you do, if you cross the line too far and you don't have that leadership stuff, you can't be a good head coach. The Kevin O'Connells, the Sean McVays, the Matt LaFleurs, they can walk the line, so to speak. Yeah. But the other side of that is what we might see with Dan Campbell, where you may be a very good leader, but do not discount the nerdy stuff. Do not discount how important play design and play calling and finding the analytics and all of the things that Matt talked about that maybe Dan Campbell doesn't bring to the table. I agree that, some people think those things are more important. Some people think the other things are more important. It's a give and take with both. But to me, at the end of the day, Ross, and you know this about me, and I've had vicious arguments about this point, I will always take the offensive play caller head coach who I hope becomes a leader, because I think this may not be something you agree with, but I think in the industry of football, it's easier to find the leadership qualities, the rah-rah, the I'm a former, I can get you guys. I think that's actually easier to find than the true scheme wizards. I think those are more rare talents. So I will always go with the McVays, the LaFleurs, who may not look like the big Mike Vrabel, Dan Campbell. Come on, man, we're going into battle. Right. They may not have that, but I'd rather take the scheme wizard side of it and hope that guy is also a leader than go with the leader guy and hope that he can constantly replace other positions on his staff with those balancing acts. I just think it's much easier to do it the offensive way than the Dan Campbell, Mike Vrabel way.
Yeah, just from a business operation standpoint, you don't want to consistently have to rehire, right? You don't want to consistently
always replacing
be in that situation.
OCs. Yeah.
Right. So
look at the Texans right now.
Yeah, exactly.
What happens with D'Amico Ryans in a couple of years?
Right. And so there's a lot of this conversation that deserves to be had and everything like that. And I think that there's, like you said, there's a give and take, there's a compromise to all of it. I don't think, and while I appreciate Matt's positivity, the Hakuna Matata of it all is a little bit too much for me, right? Like there's a little bit too much for me on that, because I do think that this is a big test for Dan Campbell and his longevity. If he proves that he can go out there and hire the right guys, or that he has hired the right guy, bringing over the pass game coordinator from the Denver Broncos, promoting from within over on the defensive side. If those prove to be the right hires, then that's great news for Dan Campbell. It's great news for the Detroit Lions. But as of right now, it has to be a question mark around them. And a lot of what it is that Dan Campbell brought to the offense, by the way, if he did bring anything to the offense, a lot of what he brought, he learned from one of those nerds and one of those offensive guys here in New Orleans from Sean Payton. Like Sean Payton was absolutely that guy. And we watched here in New Orleans a situation where it was a little bit different, but the offensive play caller went away. And then the Saints said, oh, well, we have another guy who was around for a lot of it, and so he could handle it, and then absolutely failed in terms of that situation. And so the idea that, oh, he's been around Ben Johnson and therefore everything just rubbed off, it's a little steep. We have to wait and see how it plays out.
Yeah, success doesn't come by proxy. It doesn't work that way. You can't just, if it did, then I would be way more rich than I am because I'm friends with Ross. You know what I mean? Like, where's that Dan Campbell, Sean Payton connection now? But all jokes aside, you say Sean Payton, and that's interesting because his team looks like they are ready to really take off. Today's episode is brought to you by Rougiet. Guys, you've probably heard of Viagra or Cialis. Maybe you've even tried them. But if you're looking for something beyond the usual pill, it's time to meet Rougiet Ready. Rougiet Ready is a next-gen prescription treatment designed to amplify arousal in the brain and boost blood flow. Unlike the usual pills that could take hours, Rougiet's 3-in-1 formula dissolves under your tongue, kicks in fast, on average in 15 minutes. Effects can last up to 36 hours, so you can stay confident and in control when the moment is right. I love that it's completely online. Rougiet connects you with a board-certified doctor and ships your treatment discreetly to your door. Head to rougiet.com/LockedOnNFL. Again, use the code LockedOnNFL to get 15% off today. That's RUGIET.com/LockedOnNFL. Use the promo code LockedOnNFL for 15% off. Individual results may vary with prescription treatment. Compounded drugs are permitted to be prescribed under federal law but are not FDA approved and do not undergo FDA safety, effectiveness, or manufacturing review. Please visit Rougiet website for full safety information. All right, Ross, let's continue today's edition of Locked On NFL. Talked about the Detroit Lions and why I think they might get thrown off a cliff, per se, in the NFC. But now we got to talk about a team that's currently climbing that cliff, and they're trying to get to the very top of it, and a great start last year, and that was the Denver Broncos. And look, we could talk about what the biggest question for the Denver Broncos will be, and there are a lot of questions based on where they're at in the AFC and all of that. But at the end of the day, Ross, I think we both look at this and say, what's Bo Nix gonna do in year two? And our guys from Locked On Broncos talked about that.
I think Bo Nix really being the tide that raises all boats in the harbor is the next step for this offense in 2025, Cody. And what do I mean by that? Well, obviously we saw last year Bo was doing a lot, right? He had to prepare for the draft process. You had to travel all around, interviewing with teams, doing your pro day, doing your private workouts. And then on top of that, you got to go learn an NFL offense. You got to get acclimated to a brand new city. You've got to get acclimated to mostly all new teammates, although we know Bo had a familiar face there in Denver to kind of help him transition. But at the same time, there's so much new. It's just new on top of new on top of new. And then you're learning how to play against NFL defenses as opposed to playing against college defenses. And I think the fact that Bo Nix had a historic rookie year, not just for Denver Broncos history, but nearly set the NFL rookie record with touchdown passes, had the most total touchdowns of any rookie last year at 35. I think that what we saw from Bo in year one is merely the tip of the iceberg. You hear all the time players talk about, hey, the game, it's slowing down a little bit for me. Bo said that near the end of last season. And what he means by that is that he's able to go out there and do less thinking and more playing football. And that's where you see those athletic traits shine. That's where you see, now he can point something out on film and utilize that in a game situation. It's about getting 10 steps ahead of the opposition. So there's so many different ways, Cody, but I think Bo being the tide to raise all boats in the harbor, that's the number one thing that I'm looking for in year two.
And honestly, that makes a ton of sense. Year one, you're just trying to do your job. You know what I mean?
Right.
But year two, you can go above and beyond. He talked about that draft process for rookies.
Dude.
You're not training for football. You're training for the drills that you got to do at the combine that will determine how high you get drafted and all that. Like, you're not working on football. And we've all started new jobs before. It's a whirlwind when you start a new job. You're learning new people. You're learning new stuff. Imagine if your job is intensely harder as well, too. Like, you got a big promotion and there's way more stress involved. There's so much that goes into year one. That's why we see that year two leap that people talk about, or we see that sophomore slump. Maybe guys who don't put the work in to really take that next jump. It's so clear and obvious when guys are ready to take that next step in year two. And I think if Sean Payton is the quarterback whisperer that, we see him to be, and he got that out of Bo Nix as a rookie when a lot of people thought Bo Nix was not even a first-round pick or was the sixth best quarterback or all these different things. If that's what he got out of Bo Nix in year one, imagine a full-on NFL offseason with Bo Nix. There's no doubt in my mind that the Denver Broncos are going to be a competitive football team. The question is just, how good can Bo Nix actually get?
Yeah, 100%. You're spot on this one, Tyler. The way that I look at it for the Denver Broncos, and actually I had a conversation with Matt Flynn, two-time BCS national champion. There are going to be people so young that probably don't even know what a BCS national champion was. But he was around the NFL. I know. And so was around the NFL a ton and everything like that. And he spoke to me about that leap that quarterbacks take going from year one into year two. And one of the most important things that's going to work in Bo Nix's favor is that he is a quarterback, one of the rare quarterbacks, by the way, that's going from year one into year two, along with Jaden Daniels, where nothing around him is changing all too dramatically, right? You look at Caleb Williams, new head coach. You look at Spencer Rattler, new head coach. There are all these changes elsewhere. And so that sometimes is the difference between that sophomore slump or that sophomore bump. And I think that Bo Nix is in the right environment in this situation. And of course, as you mentioned, working with a guy like Sean Payton, you have a lot of reason to be confident about what it is that this guy can get out of Bo Nix going into his second year. They've done a good job continuing to add weapons there as well, continuing to build the defense and continuing to build the run game, which are going to support the young quarterback. I think that he's in one of the best situations for any second-year quarterback going into 2025, with the exception of Jaden Daniels, of course. But those two guys are right there for me.
No, I'm with you there. And look, we've been hyping the Broncos here for quite some time. I got to be the wet blanket, though. Let me just say this. I think Bo Nix could take a step forward. Bo Nix, he's going to be awesome because his name is awesome, and sometimes it's just that simple. He's got a really cool name.
He's going to be
good.
Name,
Bo Nix, man. That just sounds like a made-up football player from Backyard Football 97 or something like that. You know what I mean? So he's going to be fine, but I don't think, on a recent episode, I got the idea from Tony Wiggins, the OG, the barber, about, coaches who have won Super Bowl and can they get their second this year. And I know that Sean Payton, we're sitting here, we're hyping up the Broncos. They're going to be good. The roster's good, the continuity, all of that. But the one thing I would tell you that I don't think the Broncos have that could push them to an actual Super Bowl, it's high-end superstars. Cortland Sutton, very good player. Marvin Mims looked like a great weapon last year. Hopefully he turns into even more. Even Devon Vele, one of the most underrated players in the league. Most people would probably never heard of him ever, but I think, he was really a helpful player last year. They have 4 really good starters on the offensive line. Luke Wattenberg at center. We'll see how that goes. But, where are the stars? Where's the guy that's going to make the huge play in the biggest moment, on the outside? They got J.K. Dobbins as their starting running back, R.J. Harvey in the second round. I just think that they're a very good football team. They're like a B-plus football team, but they can't get to that A level. Look, Pat Surtain is a superstar, and I think a guy who people need to know more is Zach Allen, as they call him, who was incredible last year on the interior defensive line. Nick Bonito, I think, should have got more love for Defensive Player of the Year. He was so good. But outside of Surtain, I just don't see the high-level superstars. I think you need a few blue-chip players to push you to that next level, and I think that's the next step for the Broncos, but it probably can't be completed until next offseason.
Yeah, I think they got one. I think they got one in this draft. I'm super high on Zade Barron coming into this team from the Texas Longhorns. Versatile, can do everything. Phenomenal culture guy. Some of the stories that I've heard about this kid in the background are amazing. Just fully realized man of a person and everything like that. Multi-dimensional, very emotionally intelligent, while also being able to be out there as a good leader, empathetic, being able to connect with his teammates, all these other things. An incredible dude. And so I'm watching for him over the defensive side, but I think you're super right about this perspective over on the offensive side. And who knows, maybe Bo Nix turns into that star, but he's going to need some of those supporting cast members. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And who is that going to be? Look, Sean Payton can make a lot out of some of the names that maybe people don't expect. Pat Bryant and Evan Ingram is a great example. I was a big Pat Bryant guy going into this. He reminds me of Marcus Colston, who was the Saints' leading touchdown getter in a big body guy. Yeah, and everything. He's not super athletic, but he's a good route runner, great blocker, will just do all the dirty work. That's the kind of stuff that gets you up there. And, we talk about Marcus Colston here as being a guy that is like one of those very, very, maybe the most underrated guy, never got a Pro Bowl, never got an All-Pro nod, any of those other things. Feels like that kind of stardom within that Denver market, within that locker room could be there for a Pat Bryant.
Listen, I know we're talking Broncos, but for a quick second,
yeah.
You're telling me Marcus Colston never got an Pro Bowl?
Not a one.
Man,
not a one. One of the best players in the NFL to never receive even so much as a Pro Bowl nod.
Seriously, that's one of those names that, 15 years from now when I'm, 50 years old and someone just says his name, I'll smile. It's just one of those things. Anyways, but
He's awesome,
with that being said, speaking of smiling, might not be too many smiles in Indianapolis with their quarterback situation this year. Yikes. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Have you ever decided at the last minute that you'd like to head to a ball game with friends or family? Maybe it's game day, you suddenly realize you want to be in the stands. That's exactly where Game Time comes in. It's the easiest way to grab last-minute tickets without the stress. With the money you save on tickets, then you can splurge on food and drinks and merch. Oh, I love a cold hot dog and a warm beer at a baseball game, folks. Maybe you could even invite me if you wanted to. All jokes aside, look, Game Time makes buying tickets fast and simple. Prices on the app actually drop the closer you get to the first pitch. They've got incredible last-minute deals, clear seat views, and the lowest price guarantee. I love Game Time because they truly do have the best features in the industry. I bought NFL, NBA, WNBA, MLB, concert, comedy, all kinds of tickets on Game Time. You should take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. All right, Ross, let's cap off today's edition of Locked On NFL. We've talked about the Lions. We've talked about the Broncos. Now we're going to keep it in the animal kingdom and talk about the Indianapolis Colts, okay? Look, the biggest question for the Colts is clearly what the heck is going on at quarterback, and for an update on that, I throw it to our guys over at Locked On Colts.
How would you feel about a whole season of Daniel Jones as the starting quarterback?
Yeah, I mean, it's unexceptional. It definitely feels along the same vein of the Gardner Minshew season. If it would have been Joe Flacco all last year, it feels like that, where it's like, this may lead to more wins, but what does it really get you in the end? But it kind of feels like that might be the end result, regardless of who the quarterback is, because I think in order to have like full confidence in Anthony Richardson being your quarterback beyond this year in 2026, he would either have to be healthy for the vast majority of the season or be super productive and show like clear growth pretty much across the board. So at this point, I think it's just win by whatever means necessary. We're going to see really the versatility of Shane Steichen. It kind of seems like he might be at his best with a somewhat boring, predictable quarterback situation. Honestly, like we all thought it might be fireworks with him and Anthony Richardson. That really hasn't been the case. Like they've obviously had their fair share of big plays and everything. But I think the best we ever saw Shane Steichen when we said, he might be in his bag, so to speak, was really when it was Gardner Minshew.
Okay, I have a theory on that. If your offense looks best with lesser talented players, that means that you have an issue with molding your system around your talented players. That is a coaching issue, in my opinion. Now, I know there are other factors involved. And look, I'm not going to say Shane Steichen's not as good of a coach as people say because he couldn't get Anthony Richardson to be good. Quite honestly, the hype for Anthony Richardson after 13 games in college was always out of line. But I thought Indianapolis handled it terribly over the last few years as well, based on what we knew about Anthony Richardson coming out of college. But either way, it looks like Daniel Jones is going to be the answer there. And I guess I have a hard time understanding what the Colts are trying to do. Do they think that their roster is good enough that if they have Daniel Jones, now they can be a true contender? Do they, it would just be much better have Anthony Richardson be absolutely awful for another season, and then you're set up to maybe take another quarterback in the 2026 draft. This seems like trying to cut both ways where, we got some long-term potential with Daniel Jones, but he's better right now. But it's trying to have your cake and eat it too, and they're just going to end up with cake on their face.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know, man. I think the Daniel Jones thing is so interesting to me because I maintain that the answer for the Indianapolis Colts right now is on a roster in Atlanta, and that they should go after Kirk Cousins. Like that to me is what they need. And I think the Falcons need to part ways with Kirk Cousins anyway. Right. They don't need to do the 2 quarterback thing. They need to ride with Michael Penix and see if that's going to work.
Yeah.
Get that all figured out. I think that that's where the Indianapolis Colts should go. But if they don't,
they aren't, dude. They're not
right. I know.
They're going to ride Daniel Jones.
But that's the thing is, like, what are you signing yourself up for? You're signing yourself up for what? The 15th selection in the NFL draft, the 14th or 13th selection in the NFL draft. You're signing yourself up for a guy that's going to maybe like mid his way through 2025 before he ends up with another team next year or something like that. Like, I don't know what the end goal is. Like, are you trying to convince your roster that you're going to be more competitive with Daniel Jones? I don't know if you can really convince anybody of that. And I don't know. I'm at a loss when it comes to Indianapolis Colts. And honestly, I think they're at a loss too.
Yeah, I think they're really in a bad spot. And here's the thing. I'll lay it out. 2 years ago, when they were going through Phillip Rivers, Matt Ryan, Carson Wentz, Gardner Minshew, their roster was like, hey, if you plopped a really good quarterback on there, they're a serious team. I think the roster talent has fallen off over the last couple of years. You start to look at their offensive line. Yes, Quentin Nelson, all-timer, one of the best guards ever. Bernard Raymond at left tackle, good player. Braden Smith at right tackle, good player. But they lose Ryan Kelly at center, who's been the stalwart pivot of that group. They lose Will Fries at guard, and both of those guys go to Minnesota, and they replace him with Tanner Bortolini, who was a 4th-round pick in 2024. I like Tanner Bortolini. I do, but is he going to be what Ryan Kelly has been the last few years? Matt Goncalves, Calves, I've heard his name pronounced a million ways, guy out of Pitt, who was drafted in 2024, he had a massive lower body injury that made him get drafted a little bit later than maybe he would have. Is he going to come back healthy? Like, that offensive line was the foundation the entire team was built on. And look at their linebacker group. Remember when they had EJ Speed and Zaire Franklin and Shaq Leonard and all, now they have Zaire Franklin and Jalen Carles, Cameron McGrone, Segun Alubi. Like, I know that they added Lou Anarumo as the defensive coordinator, but I think some of the pillars of talent that Indianapolis built their foundation on over the last few years has rotted a little bit. So even if they get a little bit better quarterback play than they've got, I don't think it makes them something that we haven't seen them be. I think they're just a middle-of-the-road team at best, and with bad quarterback play from Daniel Jones, they might be a really bad team, and maybe that would be best for them.
Maybe that does get them there. Yeah, maybe that does get them in position to go after that quarterback. But yeah, it's a similar conversation to the Denver Broncos where they lack that star power. Look, they drafted Tyler Warren. I think that's great. But the impact of a rookie tight end is not going to get you over any humps. Look at the Las Vegas Raiders. Right, yeah. Exactly. Right? Like Brock Bowers was awesome last year, but with that really, look at the San Francisco 49ers who can get some good play out of George Kittle, but then injuries and inefficiencies elsewhere limit what they're able to do. And so you look at a pretty similar situation as with Denver, but without any promise at quarterback, because they abandoned the Anthony Richardson thing despite signing up for the Anthony Richardson thing. And now they're having to turn over to Daniel Jones, who was supposed to be, the replacement for Eli Manning and effectively has turned into nothing but an Eli Manning impersonator at best. And then what is he going to do for you? I just don't see where the elevation comes from for this team at running back, at wide receiver, at tight end. Sometimes you want the quarterback to make the team better and to elevate the players. Sometimes the players need to elevate the quarterback. I don't see either of those trajectories working for the Indianapolis Colts, at least for 2025.
And as I've been saying on this show for years now, Chris Ballard is one of the most overrated general managers in the NFL. Once Andrew Luck left, he has failed the organization to find an answer at quarterback for like 7 years now.
Yeah,
like
time and
you
time
don't
again.
you don't get the excuse of, well, Andrew left, retired. That was 7 years ago.
Right.
Like
right.
I wasn't even working with Locked On. That's how long ago that's been. You know, it's just crazy to me that he continues to be talked about the way that he is. But that's a narrative and a story I've been pushing for quite some time on this program. But with that being said, before I get a little too mad with my Chris Ballard hate, we'll
madman after all.
I know it's coming out right now. But with that being said, that is going to do it for today's episode. I am your host, the Madman Tyler Rowland, for my co-host, the Mastermind Ross Jackson. As we tell you every episode, thanks for tuning in and stay safe out there.